Welcome back. We're discussing the very tough topic of the Holodomor, the genocide inflicted upon the Ukrainian people in the 1930s. And joining me to have that discussion again is Marc Shwec, director of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Thank you again, Marc, for helping us understand, because obviously the more we know, hopefully we will learn and never have something like this repeat again. But such is history. Before the commercial break, we were talking about what was the climate, what precipitated or what was used to justify this kind of genocide and a hatred, if you will, toward the Ukrainian peasants. You mentioned really Stalin being almost, as you said in your words, a demonic figure. Please expand on what you were saying.
Sure. So he wanted to do anything to achieve his goals of full power and full implementation of communism in Ukraine, which meant taking the farm people, to nationalizing all of the factories, all of the government institutions, and so on. And Ukrainian people are proud of one thing: their land. Ukrainian people perhaps were not rich in Ukraine, but when they had their land, they had their land. So of course, people don't want to work for a collective farm, and they resisted working for a collective farm. And so they implemented these high standards, thinking they're going to push them to deliver more, whereas they started to deliver less because they were not motivated by communism. And they asked them, they came into the homes and started to search for food. So the Ukrainian people, of course, now were hungry and couldn't work. So it just kept perpetuating. And Russia did not care. They kept augmenting the standards that they needed to produce. Did a shortage of food and led to a Holodomor. So it was just a demonic implementation of communism and a war of Russia against Ukraine that was taking place over centuries.
It's really well, it is evil when you think about it, but on a very practical level, if Russia's or if Stalin was relying on these farmers to produce the food, how is starving them going to help produce more? It's quite crazy.
Absolutely crazy. And how do people get motivated? It's not by beating them. And so they continued to beat them, continued to arrest them. There were some revolts that took place. They're not well known because, again, they weren't documented well, but there were revolts in various towns. The problem is all the towns and villages didn't unite. Local uprisings that took place, the Ukrainians fought back, were immediately beaten. They'd send in the army who were well fed and had horses and could travel from place to place quickly. And the Ukrainians couldn't defend themselves against the implementation of such against them, and it just got worse and worse.
And so now we're going to talk a little bit more of 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 exactly how it impacted the Ukrainians. So people were starving. What did they resort to? I mean, it sounded like some tried to hide food, understandably so. How did that work?
So some were successful in hiding food. People would bury food, but they'd come into their homes and with big sticks or loose boards or loose dirt if it was a dirt floor, and they would search for the foodstuffs. They'd go around the farm everywhere and search where they might be hiding food. And so they were terrorized completely, or they would trick children into saying where the parents hid their food. Then we were working with some kind of reward candy or something else to get them to speak up. And so that became a problem. Or if they saw somebody in town who had food and didn't look sickly, they would go and raid their home and search all over their barns and around the house where they might have buried food. So people were trying to hide things. People were begging food from neighbors. I'll tell you, my father-in-law lived in the city. He happened to work in one of the communist restaurants, and he would bring home to his family peelings that they would give the communist workers. He'd bring home the potato peelings, and that's how his family survived, just on the
Wow.
scraps that he could pick up at the restaurant. And that's a story that I heard from him when I was young, that he told about when he was a child.
And some, unfortunately, and I guess in some, anyways, some resorted to cannibalism because,
Well, that was the ultimate. I've read those stories that some people resorted to cannibalism. I know that again. I'll talk about my father-in-law, and he's do not go into the villages. There's word of children disappearing. So I don't have any firsthand knowledge of it, but I've read about it. And people were so when you become desperately hungry, what do you do? What do you do for your children? And what do you do? And they had resorted to anything they could to find food.
It's just it's ghastly what went on there, and that kind of starvation. And again, it's the dehumanization of people. That's really what this is about. Genocide's never easy to talk about. We're going to talk more about this, however, when we come back from this commercial break. Please stick around.